My name is Mark Ellison. I was 44, an IT systems engineer, and I lived in Willow Creek, Georgia. On the afternoon this began, I was turning hot dogs on a small charcoal grill while my nephew counted how many skips a flat stone could get before the ripples swallowed it. Across the grass, two friends laughed and called out their guesses. It should have been an ordinary Saturday. Overton arrived like a marching band with the music missing. Birgit Overton, president of the Willow Creek HOA and self-anointed queen of our cul-de-sac, came down the trail in high-waisted khakis with a clipboard tucked to her ribs like a badge. Her jaw was set so hard it looked carved. "Excuse me," she barked, pointing her pen at my friends. "This is private lake access. Guests are not permitted. Pack it up." I set the spatula on the grill shelf and turned. "Afternoon, Ms. Overton. It's President Overton," she snapped. The bylaws clearly state lake access is for residents only unless a guest use form is approved in advance. You submitted no form. I fought a smile and walked 3 steps to the tree line where a rusted iron marker leaned out of the brush. Months earlier, I'd wire brushed it and mounted a small plate beneath it, then laminated the plat map and zip-tied it to a cedar stake. I pointed. The plate read, "Private parcel lot. 17 not ho-maintained." "This is my shoreline," I said evenly. "It was excluded from common access in the original filing. You can verify it with the county. I already did twice." Her eyes narrowed. "The lake is part of the community, not this stretch," I said. "My deed includes this sliver. Your handbook doesn't apply to private land." Behind me, my buddy Phil lifted his beer and gestured at the grass. "We're not even swimming, just watching ducks." Birgit's gaze flicked from the marker to the laminated map to Phil's bottle, like she was looking for a lever that would move the world back under her thumb. The wind rattled the plastic sleeve on the stake. "You're still required to notify the HOA if you host a gathering," she said, planting a fresh rule like a stake. "It's a liability issue." "This isn't a gathering," I said. "It's 4 people and a grill. And liability follows jurisdiction, which you don't have here." Her mouth opened, closed, then opened again. I watched the calculation back away and regroup, or escalate and risk a scene with half the cul-de-sac walking dogs, within earshot. She pivoted, heels slicing the gravel. "We'll address this at a board meeting," she said over her shoulder, voice clipped. "Expect correspondence." She strode off, tossing a final glance at the iron marker like it had personally insulted her. The chatter on the path died as she passed, then rose again in hushed fragments. "Is that his land? I thought the lake was HOA. She loves that clipboard." I flipped the hot dogs, but the taste of the afternoon had changed. When you live under a homeowners association long enough, you learn the difference between a conversation and a prelude. Her visit wasn't about clarifying anything. It was a test, would I argue, yield, or prove I understood the rules better than she did. I hadn't always been meticulous. But a year earlier, after a rash of mail tampering on our street, I had installed a discreet driveway camera that caught the mailbox, curb, and most of the front walk. Not because I expected a fight, because I'd learned it was cheaper to have clean facts than to win a memory contest. The grill hissed. My nephew cheered a 6-skip throw. I let the afternoon wind itself down, cleaned the tongs, and carried the cooler back to the garage. As the sun slid behind the loblolly pines, I took one last look at the laminated map. It fluttered contentedly against the stake. That night I pulled my deed file from the cabinet. The recorded plat from 1986 was on top, pages crisp from being reprinted and certified. A yellow sticky note reminded me of the parcel exception language by line number. I'd highlighted the sentence months ago. Shoreline segment abutting Lot 17 is deeded to Lot 17 and expressly excluded from common elements. I wasn't a lawyer, but I could read English and count signatures. The documents were clean. Sunday passed quiet. Neighbors waved. No clipboards materialized. The iron marker stood like an old soldier. On Monday at 5:18 p.m., I turned into my driveway and braked. A bright yellow sheet was zip-tied to my mailbox post, the plastic teeth pulled tight and the paper flapping where the wind caught a corner. Across the top, bold red letters shouted, "Notice of violation." I killed the engine and walked to the post. The charges were printed in neat blocks. Unapproved gathering on HOA-managed property. Second infraction. Fine, $250 due within 10 days. I looked from the paper to the curb line and back, then up at the black dome of my driveway camera. I slipped the zip tie off, careful not to tear the page, and smoothed the creases on my palm. Okay. I said aloud to no one. There are moments when you can feel the ground tilt and lock into a new angle, an angle where things slide, sometimes faster than anyone expects. I took the notice inside, laid it flat under a cutting board to keep it straight, and opened the camera app on my phone. The timeline scrubber waited at 4:02 p.m. I tapped back 30 minutes and pressed play. The footage loaded frame by frame, the sun slanting across my driveway. At 4:07 p.m., there she was, Birgit Overton in her broad sun hat, gardening gloves pulled snug, clipboard tucked beneath her elbow. She glanced left, then right, as if the neighbor's hedges had grown eyes. From her tote bag, she drew the yellow violation notice, pressed it flat against my mailbox post, and cinched the plastic tie with the precision of someone decorating for Christmas. When it hung straight, she stepped back, adjusted the brim of her hat, and walked briskly out of frame. I replayed it twice, then exported the clip and saved still images. It was exactly the kind of proof I had expected I'd one day need. The notice itself carried the official HOA letterhead, but something about it felt off. The signature block bore the names of all 5 board members, yet I knew from Jason Mullins, the only younger member of the board, that any fine required a formal vote. I doubted there had been one, not on a Monday afternoon with 3 members usually at work. I dialed Jason's number. He answered on the 3rd ring, his voice weary. "Jason, it's Mark. I need to ask, was there a board vote authorizing a fine against me?" A pause stretched, then a sigh. "No. There wasn't. Birgit didn't even circulate anything this week." "Why?" "Because she just zip-tied a violation notice to my mailbox. It says, 2nd infraction." "That's not possible." "And if she signed for the board?" He stopped himself, voice tightening. "That would mean she forged approval." "Exactly. Can we talk in person?" "Not tonight. But come by tomorrow. Birch Room, 7 o'clock. I'll make sure it's on the agenda." I ended the call and sat at the kitchen table, the yellow paper flattened in front of me. Something stronger than irritation took root. It was the sense of lines being crossed deliberately, as if Birgit were prodding boundaries not just of land, but of what she thought she could get away with. I decided not to wait. I called Dale Whitman, the zoning officer. He and I had gone to high school together, though our paths rarely crossed now. When he picked up, I explained everything: the laminated map, the notice, the camera footage. "You're telling me," he said slowly, "that the HOA issued a fine for activity on property outside their jurisdiction?" "Yes, and it isn't the first time they've tried to claim that shoreline." Dale gave a low whistle. "If they filed records saying it was common property, that's more than an overstep. That's misrepresentation. I'll check their filings." By the time I hung up, the kitchen clock had ticked past 9. I gathered the deed, the certified plat map, and printed screenshots from the camera footage into a folder. I'd learned long ago that when facing an entrenched opponent, paper beats argument. The following morning, I drove to the county recorder's office. The clerk, a bespectacled man named Jeremy, pulled up the subdivision files. He scrolled, stopped, and tapped the screen. "Here," he said. "Lot 17. Your shoreline's clearly deeded as private. Excluded from common elements since 1986. Can I get a certified copy already printing?" The paper slid from the tray with a blue stamp embossed at the bottom. I felt a current of satisfaction run through me. But it was tempered by something else, the knowledge that Birgit had to know this already. She had tried before, and I had already shown her this very evidence. Yet she persisted. Why back home? I typed a cease and desist letter, attaching the certified plat map, deed copies, and still frames of her tying the notice. I mailed it certified and dropped a copy in the HOA's box at the community center. That evening, the knock at my door startled me. I opened it to find Jason Mullins, hands raised like a man approaching a skittish horse. "I'm not here to argue," he said quickly. "I saw your letter and the footage. Listen, neither I nor two others signed off on that notice. Birgit filed it alone, which violates your own bylaws." His eyes dropped. "Yes. And between you and me, this isn't the first time. She's been issuing notices without quorum for months. Most people pay, some grumble. But when she came after you, it hit resistance she didn't expect. Why is she pushing so hard?" "What's she after?" Jason exhaled. "Control. She's been trying to expand HOA authority. Last year, she proposed an amendment to absorb all lakefront lots as common space. It failed by 3 votes. She hasn't let it go." The pieces clicked together. The violation notice wasn't about hot dogs by the water. It was about erasing the vote she'd lost. Jason glanced over his shoulder. "We're meeting tomorrow night. You should come. Bring your documents. People need to see." As he walked away, the porch light carved deep shadows across the yellow violation still pinned to my board with a paperclip. I looked at the inked signatures, crisp as if 5 pens had moved in unison. Only one had. And if she was willing to falsify this, what else had she signed in our names? The next evening, I walked into the Birch community room carrying the folder under my arm. The fluorescent lights buzzed faintly overhead, and the smell of burnt coffee clung to the air. A dozen folding chairs had been arranged in uneven rows, already half filled with neighbors I recognized from dog walks and yard sales. At the front table sat Birgit Overton, clipboard in hand as if it were a gavel, flanked by 2 board members who looked as though they regretted every decision that had led them here. Jason Mullins sat at the far end, his flannel sleeves rolled up, flipping through a thick binder. He caught my eye and gave the faintest nod. Birgit's expression when she spotted me was something between irritation and calculation. "This is a board meeting," she announced sharply. "Residents must request speaking time 72 hours in advance." I lifted my folder. "Then I'll just sit quietly and pass these around." Jason reached for the documents. "I'll allow it," he said. Voice steady. "Property disputes are on the agenda." Birgit's lips pinched so tight I thought they might vanish altogether. As Jason flipped through the pages, the certified plat map, my deed, and stills of Birgit zip-tying the notice, I turned to face the room. "Some of you know me. For those who don't, I'm the owner of Lot 17, the strip of shoreline the HOA has been claiming as common space. It's not. The original subdivision filing excluded it from HOA jurisdiction. I've got the documents here." A murmur rippled across the chairs. One man in a denim jacket raised his hand. "Wait, does that mean fines we've paid before might not have been valid?" Birgit slammed her clipboard on the table. "That is not the issue," she snapped. "The issue is that Mr. Ellison invited guests onto land bordering community property, creating liability for everyone. That is why a violation was issued." "No," I said, my voice firm. "The issue is that you fabricated a violation notice without a board vote and misrepresented it as official. That's unlawful." Jason cleared his throat. "He's right. According to bylaws, enforcement actions require majority approval. I've reviewed his documents. This land is not under HOA jurisdiction." The room erupted. Whispers sharpened into pointed questions. "She fined me for my shed. She forced me to repaint my fence. Do we get that money back?" Birgit's face tightened. "This is all a misunderstanding. The board has acted in the best interest of the community." I leaned forward. "A misunderstanding doesn't require forged signatures. This is a pattern. And I've already spoken to the zoning office there reviewing whether the HOA filed jurisdictional maps improperly. If that's the case, fines collected under false claims could carry legal consequences. Another board member shifted uncomfortably. Are you implying fraud? I'm saying, I replied evenly, that if someone issued fines without quorum approval and misrepresented board consensus, that isn't a clerical error, that's deliberate. Jason stood, adjusting his binder. I move that we suspend all enforcement actions tied to disputed property lines until we complete an internal audit. The motion carried in a swift show of hands everyone but Birgit, whose knuckles blanched white against her clipboard. The meeting adjourned in a low tide of mutters and exchanged glances. I slipped out before Birgit could corner me. The night air outside felt cooler than it should have in early summer, carrying the restless energy of a storm that hadn't yet broken. The following morning, my phone rang as I poured coffee. Dale Whitman's name flashed on the screen. "You're not going to believe this," he said. We cross-referenced the HOA's filings. 2 years ago. They submitted an updated plat map that quietly redrew boundaries without approval. And get this, the notary listed has already admitted she never witnessed the signing. My stomach dropped. That's illegal. More than illegal. It could be criminal. And the signature on the filing, guess whose name is at the bottom? Birgit Overton? Exactly. The city's pulling the HOA's ability to issue new fines until this is investigated. You should expect official contact soon. I set the mug down carefully. It rattled against the counter anyway. Birgit had overreached before. But this was different. This was a paper trail leading straight to her door. And if she was willing to forge a plat map, then the notice on my mailbox might only be the beginning. By the time I arrived home that evening, the cul-de-sac felt different. Neighbors stood in pairs at the ends of driveways, talking in hushed tones. A few glanced up as I passed, then looked quickly away, as if worried the air itself might carry gossip back to the wrong ears. Word of the board meeting had spread faster than I expected. For the first time in years, people weren't whispering about weeds or fence paint. They were whispering about Birgit Overton. The next HOA meeting was called 3 days later, this time in the larger Oak Hall, a multi-purpose room usually reserved for graduation parties and wedding receptions. Folding chairs filled the floor, and the murmur of conversation had an edge, like static. I carried the same folder I'd brought before, but now the pages felt heavier. I wasn't just defending my own property anymore. Others had begun to realize that their fines, their citations, their humiliation might have been built on the same sand. Birgit sat at the front like a monarch returning to her throne. Her hair was sprayed into its usual helmet, her khakis crisp, her clipboard resting neatly beside a tall glass of water. Jason sat 2 seats away, eyes down on his binder. The room stilled when Birgit tapped her pen against the table. "We will begin," she said, voice sharp. "Tonight's agenda concerns unauthorized use of community resources and disruptive behavior by residents who do not respect the association's rules." Her gaze swept over me, lingering like a spotlight. I stood before she could continue. "With respect," I said, raising the folder. "The agenda should also concern fabricated fines, forged approvals, and misfiled jurisdictional maps. The county zoning office is already reviewing the documents." Gasps echoed through the rows. A woman in the second row raised her hand, but didn't wait to be called on. I paid $300 for a violation about my porch light. "Are you saying that might have been invalid?" "I'm saying," I replied, "that if fines were issued without a board vote and under false jurisdiction, then yes, it's very possible." The murmurs grew louder. A man in a plaid jacket stood. "She fined me for trimming my tree without permission. I had to cancel a vacation to pay it. Was that legal?" Birgit slammed her palm on the table. "Enough. These claims are baseless. Every action this board has taken has been in the interest of community safety and property values." Jason finally looked up. His voice was steady, but his jaw was tight. I have reviewed several of the notices personally. Many were issued without quorum approval. That is not a matter of safety. That is a matter of process. The room erupted. Some residents shouted questions. Others rose to their feet. One older man near the back, his voice hoarse, shouted above the noise. "You fined me for having a storage shed. You told me to tear it down. That shed was grandfathered in when I bought the house in 1992. You owe me for that." Birgit's face flushed crimson. She gripped her clipboard like a shield. "We are not here to revisit old grievances. We are here to maintain order." "No," I said firmly. "We're here because you've turned this neighborhood into a kingdom ruled by paperwork and threats. And people are finally asking why." The hall filled with clapping, hesitant at first, then stronger. Not everyone joined, but enough did to shift the atmosphere. Birgit's expression hardened. "If this circus continues," she said, voice quivering with anger, "I will personally ensure that any resident disrupting board business faces immediate enforcement action." The applause died, replaced with uneasy silence. That was her tell when she felt cornered. She threatened bigger consequences, but this time, the threat didn't land cleanly. Too many had already seen behind the curtain. Jason cleared his throat. "Given these concerns, I propose we table new enforcement until an independent audit is completed." Birgit snapped her head toward him. "You can't do that." "Yes, I can," Jason replied. "And I will. The residents deserve clarity." The motion was seconded almost instantly, and the vote passed with only Birgit opposing. Her knuckles whitened on the clipboard. Her lips pursed so tight they disappeared into a line. I thought the meeting might dissolve then, but instead, something stranger happened. A folded note slid across my lap from the row behind me. I glanced down. The handwriting was cramped, shaky. It read, "She's done worse than fake notices. Check the HOA's bank statements. Ask about the landscaping contracts." When I turned, the woman who had passed it, a neighbor I barely knew, was already gone, slipping out the side door into the night. The next morning, I found myself staring at the note again, its inked words digging deeper the longer I looked at them. "Check the HOA's bank statements. Ask about the landscaping contracts." My first instinct was skepticism. Rumors ran wild in Willow Creek, and plenty of them fizzled when tested against facts. But something about the shaky handwriting, the hurried exit, the fear in that woman's eyes, it carried the weight of truth. I slipped the note into my folder with the deed and plat map. If Birgit was bold enough to forge signatures on violation notices, why not the money? 2. Later that afternoon, I crossed paths with Linda Carson, a retired postal inspector who had lived on our street longer than anyone. She had the quiet, watchful air of someone who noticed far more than she ever said. We stopped near her mailbox, and when I mentioned the meeting, she gave a humorless chuckle. "She's been playing this game for years," Linda said. "I kept every notice she ever sent me. My binder's thicker than a phone book. Half of them were for things no board should even care about. A garden gnome, a screen door color. I paid some, ignored others, but it's a pattern." "Do you think it's about money?" I asked. Her eyes narrowed. What else could it be? Birgit's husband works part-time at the hardware store, and yet she always shows up in new shoes and drives a car that doesn't match the salary. Something's off. I asked if I could see her binder, and without hesitation, she invited me into her garage. On the workbench sat a stack of documents sorted into neat, color-coded tabs. Each violation notice had been carefully hole-punched and dated. Petty fines stacked into the thousands. "You see this," Linda said, flipping to a section marked Miscellaneous Fees. She claims reimbursements from the HOA's petty cash things like refreshments, printing costs, landscaping consultations, but we haven't had catered meetings, and I can promise you the community printer hasn't worked since 2019. The binder felt like a bomb waiting to detonate. I promised Linda I'd keep her name out of it for now. That evening, as the sun dipped low, I sat at my kitchen table piecing the puzzle together. On one side, my own evidence camera footage, plat maps, violation letters. On the other, Linda's binder, the anonymous note. Jason's confirmation of forged signatures, different threads, all leading to the same center, Burgett. Still, rumors and suspicions weren't enough. I needed confirmation. I called Dale Whitman again. Dale, I said, off the record. Do you know if the HOA has filed any financial disclosures recently? He paused. They're required to submit annual budgets and expenditure reports. Why, I've been told the landscaping contracts don't line up. Residents are questioning where the dues go. Dale exhaled slowly. I can't share confidential filings without an official request, but I'll say this: there are inconsistencies. Payments made to vendors no one can identify. Thousands allocated to services that never happened. Can the city force a full audit? Not yet. But if we can prove falsification or misrepresentation, yes. Keep your paperwork. The more concrete, the better. When I hung up, my phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Jason Board, emergency meeting tomorrow, 7 p.m., community center. Bring what you have, the following day. The atmosphere in Oak Hall felt more volatile than before. Neighbors didn't just sit quietly this time. They filled the air with complaints as if waiting for someone to listen. A young mother clutched her toddler and told anyone who would hear that she'd been fined $200 because her stroller was left on the porch. A retired veteran explained he had been cited for a flagpole, even though state law protected his right to display it. When Birgit entered, the noise dropped but didn't die. She took her seat and lifted her clipboard like a shield. Jason spoke first, voice carrying across the rows. I've received multiple complaints that violation notices have been issued without quorum. We also have questions about expenditures, landscaping, petty cash, legal consultations. Residents are demanding transparency. Birgit's eyes blazed. This is a smear campaign. These lies threaten the integrity of our community. Anyone repeating them risks legal action. But instead of silence, the room erupted with shouts. Show us the bank records. Where's our money? Why are we paying for things we never see? For the first time, Birgit looked unsettled. Her hand shook slightly as she tapped the clipboard. She started to speak, but the noise drowned her out. Then she leaned forward, her voice low but sharp enough to cut through. If you think you can destroy this HOA with baseless accusations, you are mistaken. And anyone who sides with him, she stabbed her pen toward me, will regret it. The threat hung in the room like smoke, and for a long second, no one breathed. That night, long after the meeting broke apart in a swirl of anger and confusion, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of papers spread across the wood. The violation notice, the certified plat map, Linda's binder of fines, the anonymous note. Each document felt like a piece of a puzzle that, once assembled, would reveal just how far Birgit Overton had stretched her power. The house was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator. I found myself replaying the threat she had spat out in Oak Hall. Anyone who sides with him will regret it. It wasn't the words themselves. It was the conviction behind them. She didn't sound afraid. She sounded cornered. And cornered people were unpredictable. The next morning, my phone rang before 7. It was Dale. Mark, I need to see you today. Something came up in the filings. By mid-morning, I was in his cramped office at City Hall. He slid a manila folder across the desk. Inside were photocopies of the HOA's jurisdictional filings from 2 years earlier. My eyes caught immediately on the altered plat map parcel lines redrawn in bold ink. Lot 17 absorbed into shaded blocks labeled Common Area. That's not what's on the county record, I said. Exactly, Dale replied. And look at the notary section. The signature was a looping scrawl I didn't recognize. accompanied by a stamped seal. The notary listed here admitted she never signed this. Dale continued. She told us she hadn't seen Birgit in years, which means someone used her stamp without permission. That's a felony. Yes, and that's why the city has suspended the HOA's authority to issue new fines. An official investigation is opening. I exhaled slowly, a mix of relief and apprehension washing through me. This wasn't just neighborhood squabbling anymore. It was fraud, plain and simple. Leaving City Hall. I drove back through Willow Creek. Neighbors were mowing, walking dogs, carrying groceries, normal suburban rituals. But I couldn't shake the feeling that all of it was balanced on a hollow frame. How many of these people had been quietly robbed through fabricated fines? How many had suffered in silence because they assumed the HOA was untouchable by the time I pulled into my driveway? The answer was already knocking at my door. Linda Carson stood on my porch, holding her binder tight against her chest. "I thought you should have this," she said, pressing the whole thing into my hands. "I'm done watching from the sidelines. Use it. Are you sure these are your records?" "They're everyone's records," she said. "She's been bleeding this neighborhood dry, and people are scared to speak up. Maybe you're not." Before I could thank her, she turned and walked briskly back to her house. I set the binder on the kitchen counter, opened it, and thumbed through the tabs. Each notice was worse than the last $75 for a flower pot on a porch, $400 for a trampoline in a fenced backyard, $200 for an unauthorized shade of beige on siding, all with Birgit's signature, all without evidence of board approval. The pattern was undeniable. This wasn't petty oversight. This was a system, one designed to extract money from anyone unwilling or unable to fight back. That evening, as the sun sank behind the trees, I printed copies of the worst examples and clipped them into a neat stack. If Birgit wanted a battle at the next board meeting, I was ready. I had just finished stapling the last page when I heard the scrape of paper sliding across my front porch. My heart kicked. I opened the door and looked down. An envelope lay on the welcome mat. No address, no stamp. Just my name, written in that same shaky handwriting I'd seen before. I tore it open under the porch light. Inside was a single sheet of lined paper. The message was short, scrawled in hurried strokes. She forged more than maps. Look at the bank. Follow the landscaping money. But be careful. People who ask too many questions have accidents. The porch light flickered as the wind shifted and the paper rattled in my hand. I looked up and scanned the street. Curtains twitched. Somewhere, a dog barked. For the first time since this began, I felt a cold edge of fear cut through the determination. This wasn't just about fines anymore. This was about money. Real money. And someone out there wanted me to know that digging deeper might come with a price. The knock at my door came just after 9 the following morning. It wasn't a neighbor this time. When I opened it, a tall woman in a charcoal blazer stood on my porch, a leather folder tucked beneath one arm. She introduced herself as Detective Angela Rivas with the County Financial Crimes Division. The badge clipped to her belt gleamed in the sunlight. "Mr. Ellison," she said, her tone calm but direct. "We're conducting a preliminary review of Willow Creek HOA's financial practices. I understand you've retained documents that might be relevant." I stepped aside and gestured toward the dining table, where Linda's binder and my folder already sat in an untidy stack. She set her folder down beside them and began flipping through the contents with a precision that made me suddenly grateful I'd organized everything by tab. "You said these notices were issued without board approval," she asked. "Yes. Jason Mullins, one of the board members, confirmed it. 2 others have hinted the same." She nodded, jotting notes in tight handwriting. "And this camera footage, this clearly shows Ms. Overton posting a violation without consensus." "Exactly. And if you look at the certified plat map, you'll see the property line was deliberately misrepresented in their filings 2 years ago." She scanned the page, her expression tightening just slightly. "We've already flagged discrepancies in those filings. What's more concerning, though, are the financial reports. Several line items don't add up. Payments for landscaping services billed at thousands of dollars a month, yet no evidence of work performed. Legal consultation fees supposedly paid to firms that don't exist in the state registry. And multiple transfers into an account registered to an LLC controlled by Ms. Overton's nephew. I leaned back in my chair, the weight of her words pressing down. So it isn't just fines. No, she said firmly. The fines may have been a smokescreen. The real money appears to have moved through vendor payments. We're still verifying, but there are gaps too wide to ignore. It was one thing to suspect Burgett of power tripping through petty violations. It was another to hear a county investigator suggest she'd been siphoning real money out of the neighborhood for years. Rivas closed the folder. We'll need formal statements from you and others, and copies of everything you've gathered. If these patterns hold, this moves from mismanagement into fraud, and fraud on this scale has teeth. She stood, thanked me for my cooperation, and walked back to her car. I watched from the window as she drove off, the taillights fading beyond the bend. The rest of the day, I couldn't settle. Every ordinary sound, the dishwasher cycle, the thud of a basketball in the neighbor's driveway, the hum of a lawnmower felt distant. My mind circled the same point: how many residents had struggled to pay dues, cut back on groceries, or canceled vacations because Burgett had fabricated fines while funneling their money into a personal scheme. By evening, I found myself in Jason Mullins's garage. The smell of oil and sawdust lingered in the air, a workbench cluttered with half-finished projects lining the wall. He leaned against the hood of his truck, arms crossed, listening as I relayed everything Detective Rivas had said. She confirmed it. I finished. Fake vendors, fake legal bills, money funneled into her nephew's company. Jason cursed under his breath. I knew she was cutting corners, but this is theft. And the rest of us on the board, we're going to get dragged with her if we don't act. You've got to decide where you stand. Jason, either you expose her with us, or you go down with her. He rubbed his temples. There's more. I didn't want to believe it, but I've seen checks cut to Green Ridge Landscaping. Problem is, Green Ridge doesn't even have trucks. It's a shell. Burgett insisted we approve the invoices anyway. She said the crews came at night. At night, I asked incredulously. To mow lawns, Jason gave a bitter laugh. That's what I thought. But she had 2 members rubber stamp it, and the payments went through. Thousands. I opened Linda's binder and flipped to the section on petty cash reimbursements. Jason's eyes widened as he scanned the figures. $8,000 in 3 years. Claimed for refreshments and printing. We never had refreshments. The printer's been broken for ages. I closed the binder with a sharp snap. Then we take this straight to Rivas. She's already looking. This will seal it. Jason's jaw tightened. If you do, she'll know it came from me. And if you think she's dangerous now, wait until she realizes her house of cards is falling. His words hung heavy in the dim garage. And for the first time, I wondered whether Burgett's threats of regret weren't just bluster, but promises she intended to keep. The following week moved like quicksand. Every day seemed calm on the surface: children on bikes, sprinklers arcing across lawns, delivery trucks rattling past, but beneath it I could feel the ground shifting. Neighbors were restless. Whispers carried across hedges. Some looked at me with gratitude, others with suspicion, as if speaking out had made me dangerous to stand beside. By Thursday evening, Jason invited me to another gathering in his garage. This time, there were more people. Linda Carson sat with her binder open across her lap. A retired couple, the Harpers, leaned against folding chairs, arms crossed. A young mother named Renee bounced her infant gently while glaring at the stack of documents on the workbench. This is the Transparency Committee, Jason said simply. If the board won't investigate itself, then we will. Linda flipped to a tab marked Notices. Here's what I've logged since 2019: 37 separate violation letters, all signed by Birgit, none showing quorum approval. Fines total just over $9,000. Most of them came with threats of lien if not paid immediately. I kept every envelope. The Harpers exchanged a look. She fined us for a trellis we'd had for 15 years. Mr. Harper said. We couldn't fight it. We didn't have the money for a lawyer. So we paid, Renee added bitterly. I paid $150 for leaving my stroller on the porch overnight. I was on maternity leave. I barely had the money to cover diapers. I glanced at Jason, who was scribbling notes. This isn't just overreach, I said. It's a system. She targets people she thinks won't push back. Jason nodded, and the financial side matches the pattern. Green Ridge landscaping invoices show up every month, $2,000 to $3,000 a pop, but there's no record of any trucks, crews, or even a business license. Payments authorized anyway. Linda pulled out another sheet. Petty cash reimbursements $8, $400 across 3 years. Items listed as refreshments, printing, legal consultations. Yet every meeting I attended had a single jug of tap water, and the community printer hasn't worked in years. Renee's voice shook. So where did it go? We all knew the answer, though none of us wanted to say it aloud into Birgit's pocket, or somewhere close enough. Jason set down his pen. We submit this to Detective Rivas, quietly, but formally. Let the county handle it. The Harpers agreed. Linda nodded. Even Renee, exhausted but resolute, whispered, Do it. I gathered the stack into a neat pile, clipped it, and slid it into a manila envelope. My fingers lingered on the flap before sealing it. This wasn't just neighborhood drama anymore. This was evidence of fraud. The next morning, I delivered the envelope directly to Detective Rivas at the county office. She received it with the same calm professionalism, but her eyes sharpened as she flipped through the binder pages. This is exactly what we needed. With this, we can subpoena bank records. Her words should have comforted me, but as I left the building, I couldn't shake the gnawing unease. Because if Rivas knew, then Birgit would soon know we had given her enemies ammunition. That evening, the unease turned concrete. When I pulled into my driveway, an envelope lay on the welcome mat. No stamp, no return address, just my name scrawled in jagged letters. Inside was a single scrap of paper. Drop it. Last warning. No signature, no explanation, just those 3 words. I stood in my entryway staring at the message while the dusk deepened outside. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower droned. Across the cul-de-sac, porch lights blinked on. Everything looked ordinary, but nothing felt safe. Later that night, I sat at my desk, trying to focus on work, when my phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number appeared on the screen. You don't know what you're digging into. Stop before someone gets hurt. I froze, the glow of the screen lighting my hands. The earlier note had been unsettling, but this was different. Someone had my number. Someone wanted me to feel cornered in my own home. I saved the message, attached a screenshot to an email addressed to Detective Rivas, and hit send. My hand trembled as I shut off the phone. I had thought this was about property lines and phony fines, but tonight, it was clear this had moved into darker territory. And if Birgit wasn't bluffing, the next move could hit closer than anyone expected. The following Monday, the neighborhood looked deceptively calm. Kids chased each other with squirt guns, sprinklers ticked rhythmically across lawns, and a delivery truck rumbled past stacked mailboxes. Yet underneath the postcard suburbia, a current of unease ran thick. I felt it in the way conversations stopped when I walked by, in the way blinds shifted just enough for eyes to peek out. Everyone had heard. Everyone was waiting. That evening, I received a call from Detective Rivas. Her tone was clipped, professional, but the words carried weight. We've subpoenaed the HOA's bank statements. The numbers don't add up. Large transfers made monthly to an entity called Green Ridge Landscaping. But the Secretary of State's office shows no business by that name. I thought of Jason's confession in his garage. "It's a shell," I said quietly. "That's what it looks like," she replied. "We're also tracing payments marked as legal consultations. None of the attorneys listed are real. We're moving forward with a formal financial crimes investigation." I thanked her and hung up, but my relief was short-lived. Because as much as this vindicated what we suspected, it also meant Birgit would realize the walls were closing in. And when people like her feel cornered, they strike. The strike came sooner than I expected. The very next night, Jason called me, his voice low, tense. "She's going after me," he said. "Birgit knows I've been talking." She showed up at my porch this morning, clipboard in hand, telling my wife our shed violates the bylaws. We've had that shed for 10 years, Mark. She knows it's grandfathered in. She's sending a message, I said grimly. "She wants you scared." "It worked," Jason admitted. "My wife's shaken. She wants us to stay out of it. But if we back off now, she wins." I told him to hold steady, that we were closer than ever to exposing her. But as I hung up, I couldn't shake the gnawing guilt. Birgit wasn't just retaliating against me anymore. She was targeting anyone who stood near me. 2 days later, the local news vans arrived, Channel 9 parked just outside the Willow Creek sign, cameras aimed at the manicured hedges and cheerful cul-de-sac entrance. A reporter in a sharp suit stood on the sidewalk, microphone in hand, talking about allegations of fraud, fabricated fines, and potential embezzlement within one of the county's largest homeowners associations. The effect on the neighborhood was immediate. Some residents came forward, eager to vent their grievances. Others ducked away, unwilling to be on camera, fearful of what Birgit might do. The fragile unity we'd begun to build splintered. That night, as I took the trash to the curb, a shadow moved across the street. A man I didn't recognize leaned against a car, arms folded, watching me. He didn't speak, didn't move, just stood there until I went back inside. I checked the driveway camera later. The car was a dented gray sedan with no plates on the front. When I scrolled forward, the footage showed the man driving off at 11:42 p.m. My stomach tightened. Was he one of Birgit's relatives, a hired hand, or just coincidence? The following morning, another envelope appeared at my door. This one wasn't handwritten. It was typed, neat, folded into thirds. Inside was a single sheet. "You think you've won because the county is sniffing around, but you don't know the half of it. The money trail doesn't stop with her. Keep digging, and you'll find names you don't want to see." I read it twice, then a third time. The warning was clear, but buried inside was something more dangerous, an admission. If Birgit wasn't acting alone, then the rot ran deeper than anyone imagined. That evening, the Transparency Committee met again. I laid the letter on Jason's workbench, the typed words glaring under the fluorescent bulb. "This isn't just her," I said. "There are others, maybe even inside the board." Silence filled the garage. Linda's jaw tightened. Renee rocked her infant slowly, eyes wide. Jason rubbed a hand over his face. "If that's true," he said quietly, "then everything we've uncovered so far, it's only the surface." The room felt heavier than the four walls could contain. We weren't just residents fighting an overbearing HOA president anymore. We were standing at the edge of a scheme that had drained thousands from our neighbors, maybe tens of thousands. And for the first time, I realized the truth we had uncovered enough to shake the neighborhood, but not enough to know how deep the rot went. The raid came on a Tuesday morning. I had just poured my first cup of coffee when the sound of tires crunching gravel drew me to the front window. 2 unmarked sedans and a county sheriff's cruiser rolled to a stop in front of Birgit Overton's house. Within moments, plainclothes officers stepped out, their jackets marked with faint yellow lettering. They moved with quiet precision, carrying boxes and evidence bags up her walkway. By the time I slipped outside, half the cul-de-sac had gathered at a distance, some clutching mugs, others clutching their phones. It was surreal watching the woman who had once barked orders at block parties now confronted by detectives on her own porch. Her husband, a wiry man with gray hair and weary eyes, hovered near the door. Birgit herself appeared in a tailored blouse, hair lacquered into place, clipboard clutched to her chest as if it were armor. She was arguing, her voice sharp enough to carry down the street. "You can't just take those," she shouted. "These are official HOA documents." One of the officers held up a warrant. "Ma'am, you've been served. Please step aside." Neighbors whispered behind me. Someone muttered, "Finally." Another snapped a photo, fingers trembling with excitement or fear, I couldn't tell which. The officers carried out file boxes, a desktop computer wrapped in plastic, and two bulging binders. Each trip down the walkway chipped away at Birgit's composure. She started with outrage, shifted to bargaining, then fell into stony silence. Her husband stared at the ground, not meeting anyone's gaze. Jason appeared at my side, his expression grim. "They're seizing records. Rivas must have found enough to escalate." I nodded. "The financial trail has to be. Those landscaping contracts. The fake legal fees." The tension in the air was electric. Some neighbors looked vindicated, others uneasy, as though realizing they had written checks that might now be evidence tags. For years, Birgit's authority had seemed absolute. Watching it stripped away in broad daylight shook people in ways I hadn't expected. One of the officers paused at the curb, addressing the crowd. "Please clear the area. This is an active investigation." We stepped back, but no one left. It was as if the entire cul-de-sac needed to witness the fall of its self-proclaimed queen. By mid-afternoon, the news vans arrived. Camera crews set up just outside the subdivision sign, microphones catching the whispers of residents who, until this moment, had been too afraid to speak openly. The story had moved beyond our neighborhood. It was becoming a county scandal. That evening, a notice appeared on the community bulletin board: Emergency Accountability Forum, Thursday, 7 p.m. Oak Hall. Attendance strongly encouraged. It was signed by the city-appointed trustee now overseeing the HOA during the investigation. When Thursday came, the hall was packed wall to wall. Folding chairs scraped across the floor as late arrivals squeezed in. The trustee, a calm man in a navy suit, opened the meeting but quickly ceded the microphone to three speakers, a councilwoman, a consumer protection lawyer, and an auditor from the Department of Real Estate. The lawyer spoke first. "What has occurred here is not a clerical oversight. It is a deliberate attempt to expand authority through fraudulent filings, financial misreporting, and coercive enforcement. We are pursuing restitution and criminal charges." A ripple went through the room. I saw heads nodding, fists tightening on armrests. The auditor followed. "Our preliminary review has identified over 30 fabricated violation notices, totaling more than $20,000 in improper fines. None of these funds were reported in the HOA's annual budget." The hall fell into stunned silence. Then a man near the back, voice breaking, stood. "That money was my wife's medical fund. We skipped treatments because of her fines. Can we get it back?" The lawyer nodded. "We are establishing a restitution fund. Impacted residents will be contacted." Anger simmered across the rows. People muttered about being bullied, humiliated, drained of savings. Years of frustration finally had a name: fraud. When the microphone was opened for resident questions, the line stretched to the door. Accusations poured out about fences, porches, paint colors, and threats of liens. Each story was another cut, another reminder of how deeply Birgit's reign had scarred the neighborhood. And through it all, I couldn't shake one thought: if the financial crimes team had only scratched the surface. What else was buried in those seized boxes? The meeting closed with a promise of continued investigation. But as the crowd filed into the humid night, I caught Jason's eye. He looked pale, uneasy. "She's not finished," he said quietly. "What do you mean they've taken everything?" He shook his head. Not everything. She knows things that aren't on paper. If she decides to talk, she could drag others down with her, and some of them won't go quietly. The words settled over me like a shadow. Birgit wasn't just fighting for power anymore. She was fighting for survival, and survival made people dangerous. The forum had ended in a roar of frustration, but the real shockwaves came afterward. Within 24 hours, the county issued a public statement confirming that Willow Creek HOA's accounts had been frozen. Automatic withdrawals for dues were suspended. For the first time in years, money wasn't flowing into Birgit's hands. By Friday evening, the neighborhood was buzzing like a beehive that had been struck with a stick. Groups clustered at mailboxes, conversations spilling out onto sidewalks. Some residents were jubilant, saying it was justice long overdue. Others, particularly those who had once sided with Birgit, wore the look of people realizing they might have backed the wrong horse. That night, Jason called. His voice carried the weight of exhaustion. "They've confirmed it," he said. Green Ridge Landscaping was nothing but a shell. Payments funneled straight to an account controlled by Birgit's nephew. Over $30,000. I sat heavily at the table. 30,000. And that's just what they've traced so far, he said. Rivas told me the figure will climb. They've also uncovered false invoices for legal services, entire law firms that don't exist. I pinched the bridge of my nose, trying to absorb it. So every fine, every notice, it wasn't just petty control, it was cover for theft. Exactly. And now, Jason added, his voice dropping, residents are demanding answers. The trustee has called another open session. They want us to speak. 2 nights later, Oak Hall was packed tighter than before. Not a single chair sat empty. People lined the walls, some standing on tiptoe to see. The trustee introduced the session, but quickly ceded the floor to the county auditor. He carried a thick binder and spoke into the microphone with deliberate gravity. Residents of Willow Creek, our review is ongoing, but preliminary findings show systematic misappropriation of funds. At least 37 notices of violation were fabricated, resulting in more than $20,000 collected under false pretenses. These funds were not reported in annual budgets. Additionally, over $35,000 in payments were issued to shell vendors, most prominently Green Ridge Landscaping, an entity with no state registration. The hall erupted. Some shouted angrily. Others gasped aloud. A woman in the second row began to cry quietly. The lawyer stepped up next. These actions constitute fraud. Restitution will be pursued, but there may also be criminal liability for those who knowingly participated. We are working with the county prosecutor to prepare charges. A man at the back stood, voice shaking. She took my son's college fund, fined us over a fence color we had permission for. How do you pay back years stolen? No one had an answer. Then came the moment that shifted everything. The auditor flipped to another tab. We have reason to believe falsified signatures were used not only on plat maps, but also on internal board votes. At least 3 amendments were passed with signatures that do not match records. This includes a fee increase in 2021. The words landed like a hammer. Jason, seated near the front, looked as though the air had been knocked out of him. He leaned back slowly, color draining from his face. I realized at once why, if Birgit had forged votes, she might have forged his name. The room buzzed with speculation. People craned their necks, demanding to know who had signed what. The trustee banged his gavel to restore order, but the questions only grew sharper. Finally, Jason rose, his voice rough. I never approved those amendments. If my name is on them, it was forged, and I'm prepared to testify under oath. Gasps filled the hall. Birgit wasn't present. She hadn't shown her face in public since the raid, but the mention of forgery tied directly to her reign hung in the air like a noose tightening. As the meeting adjourned, neighbors spilled into the humid night, their voices raised with a mixture of anger and relief. Some clapped Jason on the shoulder, others muttered about lawsuits. The tide had turned fully against Birgit, but the current carried a dangerous undertow. Walking home, I fell into step with Linda. She carried her binder against her chest as if it were armor. "She'll lash out again," she said softly. "Mark my words. People like her don't go quietly. If she knows she's going down, she'll try to take someone with her." The streetlights hummed overhead, casting long shadows across trimmed lawns. Linda's warning echoed in my head, because if the forged votes were real, then the rot wasn't just Birgit, it had spread deeper. And the deeper it ran, the more explosive the reckoning would be. The courthouse steps were crowded the morning Birgit finally appeared in public. News crews jostled for camera angles, their lenses glinting in the autumn sun. Residents clustered on the sidewalks, some clutching manila envelopes of their own violation notices, others holding signs scrawled with phrases like, "We want justice and HOA isn't a kingdom." I stood among them, the weight of my own folder pressing against my side. Jason was beside me, his face pale but steady. "This is it," he murmured. "No more hiding behind clipboards and bylaws." Inside the courtroom, the air was thick with anticipation. Birgit entered, flanked by her attorney, a tall man in a navy suit. She looked smaller than I'd ever seen her, her hair down instead of in its usual helmet, her blazer hanging loose at the shoulders. Yet her chin was lifted, eyes scanning the room as though daring anyone to say she'd been diminished. The prosecutor opened with a summary that drew gasps from the gallery: falsification of public records, unlawful use of HOA funds, and willful misrepresentation of jurisdictional authority. This was not mismanagement, he declared. It was theft, and it was fraud, one by one. Witnesses were called. The county auditor detailed the shell companies, the forged signatures, the falsified votes. A notary testified that her stamp had been used without her knowledge. Linda took the stand, binder in hand, flipping through years of violation notices she'd cataloged with the precision of a career inspector. Her voice never shook as she said, "Every one of these was signed by Ms. Overton." Most had no board approval. When my turn came, I stepped up, swore the oath, and sat in the witness chair. The prosecutor asked about the laminated plat map, the violation notice, the footage of Birgit zip-tying it to my mailbox. He held up a still image for the court, her gloved hands fastening the bright yellow paper like a banner of conquest. "Yes," I said, my voice firm. "That is her." And that notice was not authorized by the board. Birgit's attorney rose for cross-examination. His questions came fast, designed to rattle me. "Mr. Ellison, you are not a lawyer or a surveyor. Correct, no. But I can read a deed. You have had personal conflicts with my client. Have you not? I have had conflicts with how she abused her position." I replied evenly. The attorney pressed harder. "Isn't it true you grilled food at the lakefront with guests present, in violation of standard HOA rules on HOA property?" "Maybe, but this wasn't..." "That's the entire point." The gallery stirred. Even the judge arched an eyebrow at the defense's flimsy angle. The attorney sat down, visibly frustrated. The climax came when Jason was called. He testified with a steadiness that surprised me, recounting how he'd seen Birgit push through invoices and fines without quorum, how she'd silenced dissent, how his own name had appeared on documents he never signed. His voice cracked only once, when he admitted, "I regret not speaking sooner. I let fear keep me quiet." But silence let her grow bolder. By the time the prosecutor rested, the evidence felt overwhelming. The jury leaned forward in their seats. Even the reporters had stopped scribbling, their pens hovering as though nothing more needed to be said. Birgit herself never testified. Her attorney argued she was the victim of clerical errors, that others on the board had conspired against her. But the defense felt hollow, a weak umbrella against a storm. After 2 days of testimony, the judge delivered the verdict guilty on all counts. The courtroom erupted, some in cheers, some in stunned silence. Birgit sat motionless, her hands folded in her lap, eyes fixed on a point no one else could see. As the gallery emptied, Jason touched my arm. "It's not over," he said. "The sentencing's next week. And if what we heard about forged votes is true, others may be dragged into this." I nodded, the weight of his words pressing heavy. Because Birgit had been exposed, yes, but the investigation had cracked open a door. Behind it, more names might wait in the shadows. And when those names came to light, the neighborhood would have to face the possibility that the betrayal hadn't come from one woman alone, but from people sitting beside us all along. The week before sentencing, Willow Creek felt like it was holding its breath. The air was different, lighter in some ways, heavier in others. No more yellow notices appeared on mailboxes. No more early morning confrontations with a clipboard. But the silence carried its own tension, like the pause before a storm breaks. Signs began to sprout across front lawns. Vote for integrity. No more abuse. HOA isn't a kingdom. For the first time since I'd moved here, neighbors were talking openly on sidewalks, comparing notes, asking questions they once whispered only behind closed doors. It was a neighborhood waking up, realizing how deeply they had been manipulated. An emergency panel, appointed by the city, held one final meeting at Oak Hall. This time, there was no Birgit, no pretense of authority. Just folding chairs in a wide circle and a thermos of coffee passed around like a peace offering. The trustee explained the options: the HOA could dissolve entirely, or the community could rewrite its charter from scratch. Ballots would be mailed to every homeowner, counted by an independent third party. When the floor opened, the voices that rose carried years of bottled anger. "I paid fines I couldn't afford," one woman said, clutching a sheaf of papers. "All for paint colors that had already been approved. She threatened to lien my house," another man said, his voice trembling. "I thought I'd lose everything over a shed." Even those who had once defended her now admitted their shame. "We thought she was protecting property values." A couple confessed, but really, she was protecting herself. Linda stood, binder in hand, her voice steady. "We all let this happen. Not because we agreed with her, but because we didn't pay attention. That ends now." Her words cut through the hall like a bell. People nodded, some murmuring assent, others sitting straighter in their chairs. For the first time, the conversation wasn't about fear. It was about ownership of their homes, their voices, their community. Jason rose next. He had become a reluctant leader in all this, a man who once volunteered for the board out of obligation, but now spoke with the weight of hard lessons. "We can't rebuild by pretending nothing happened," he said. "We either start clean, or we remain tied to the same structure that allowed fraud to thrive. I'm asking you all to choose wisely." The vote was scheduled for the following Saturday. In the days leading up to it, the neighborhood transformed. Lawns displayed more signs. Neighbors knocked on doors, urging turnout. Even people who had never once attended a meeting were suddenly engaged. For too long, silence had been the soil Birgit thrived in. Now, that silence was gone. When Saturday came, ballots were collected, counted, and verified by a third party. I stood outside Oak Hall with Jason and Linda as the trustee read the results: 87% in favor of full dissolution. A cheer erupted, some clapped, some wept openly. A few shook their heads, still uncertain what life without an HOA would mean. But the majority stood united. For the first time, Willow Creek was free. That afternoon, a small crowd gathered at the lakefront, the very strip of shoreline that had sparked this war. The old metal sign declaring HOA property violators will be fined had been taken down. In its place stood a simple wooden post with a brass plaque. "This land belongs to Lot 17. Respect all property lines. Enjoy the view." Children skipped rocks into the water, laughter carrying across the breeze. A couple unpacked a picnic on their own strip of shoreline, smiling as if for the first time in years. No one looked over their shoulder. No one waited for a clipboard to appear. As the sun dipped lower, Jason joined me near the water. His face was tired but hopeful. "You ever think it would go this far?" he asked. I shook my head. I thought she'd back off once she was called out. "I never imagined the whole HOA would unravel." He gave a wry smile. "Sometimes things have to break before they can be rebuilt. Or, in this case, before they can be let go." Behind us, neighbors mingled, swapping stories and plans. It felt, for the first time, like a community choosing its own path rather than one dictated by fear. The HOA was gone. Burgett was awaiting sentencing. And Willow Creek, our neighborhood, was finally learning what it meant to breathe again. The sentencing hearing drew a crowd larger than any HOA meeting ever had. The county courthouse buzzed with low murmurs as neighbors, reporters, and even a few city officials filled the gallery. I found a seat beside Jason and Linda, both clutching folders as if the weight of the past year still sat heavy on their shoulders. When Burgett entered with her attorney, a hush spread through the room. She looked different from the woman who had once stormed down our streets with a clipboard like a sword. Her hair hung limp, her blazer wrinkled, her posture sagging, yet her eyes still darted defiantly across the gallery, as though daring us to celebrate her downfall. The judge summarized the charges: falsification of records, unlawful use of HOA funds, willful misrepresentation of jurisdiction. "The evidence is overwhelming," he said. "The damage to this community has been significant. This court finds Ms. Overton guilty on all counts." Gasps rippled through the room, though no one was surprised. The judge continued probation, restitution payments, community service, and the seizure of her assets to repay the stolen funds. Her home would be sold under court order to cover part of the penalty. Burgett stood rigid, her face pale, but she didn't speak. Her attorney placed a hand on her arm, guiding her back to the table. Afterward, the crowd spilled out onto the courthouse steps. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now gathered in clusters, talking animatedly. Reporters shoved microphones forward, asking residents how they felt. One man who had been fined for his porch swing said bluntly, "I feel like I got my life back." Jason leaned close to me. "It's strange, isn't it? For so long, she controlled everything with fear. Now she can't control a single step she takes." I nodded. Fear is powerful, but once people stop believing, it collapses fast. Back in Willow Creek, the transformation was almost immediate. With the HOA dissolved, residents began reclaiming their own spaces in ways small and large. Lawns once cited for being too wild now bloomed with native flowers. Fences that had been painted under threat of fines were repainted in bold colors. Neighbors stopped looking over their shoulders. One Saturday, I joined Linda and a handful of others repainting the community tool shed, a project no one asked us to do, but everyone wanted. Kids darted in and out with paint rollers twice their size, laughter echoing off the boards. Someone brought a cooler of lemonade. Someone else grilled burgers on a portable stove. No one needed a form, a vote, or a clipboard. It just happened because people wanted it to. Evenings by the lake changed most of all. Families spread blankets on the grass, fishing lines arced into the water, and teenagers skipped rocks until the last light faded. I grilled again by my shoreline, folding chairs set out for anyone who stopped by. Sometimes it was 3 people, sometimes 10, but every time, it felt like what a neighborhood should have been all along. Burgett's house sat dark for weeks. The flower beds she once trimmed with military precision browned at the edges. Her prized hydrangeas wilted. When the realtor's sign finally went up, neighbors barely glanced as prospective buyers toured. It wasn't just a house anymore. It was a monument to what happens when power is abused. One evening, Linda stopped by my porch with her binder, the same one she had clutched like a shield during those chaotic weeks. She set it down on the table and tapped it once. "I don't need this anymore," she said. "You sure?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "The fight's over." And we won. I watched her walk back across the street, her shoulders lighter than I'd ever seen them. For the first time, Willow Creek didn't feel like a battleground. It felt like home. The HOA had been dismantled, its queen dethroned. But the victory wasn't just in Burgett's downfall. It was in the way neighbors began looking out for each other again. And as I sat watching the sun slip behind the trees, I realized the real restitution wasn't money. It was trust, rebuilt plank by plank, conversation by conversation, until the neighborhood felt whole again. The day the HOA officially ceased to exist felt almost surreal. The trustee had mailed out final notices, confirming the dissolution and transferring any remaining oversight back to the county. For the first time in decades, Willow Creek wasn't tethered to a board, a charter, or the shadow of a clipboard. That Saturday, neighbors gathered at the lakefront not for a meeting, not for a vote, but just because they wanted to. Someone brought folding chairs, another set up a portable speaker with soft music, and kids ran barefoot through the grass. The brass plaque on the wooden post glinted in the sun. This land belongs to Lot 17. Respect all property lines. Enjoy the view. I stood by the grill, smoke curling into the evening air, watching the shoreline fill with life. No forms to file, no fear of yellow notices, just laughter and the smell of charcoal. Jason joined me, balancing 2 paper plates piled high with burgers. He looked more at ease than I'd seen him in months. "Can you believe it?" he asked, handing me a plate. "A year ago, we couldn't stand in this spot without her threatening fines. Now look at us." I glanced around. Linda was chatting with the Harpers. Binder finally set aside for good. Renee spread a blanket for her toddler, who toddled happily between neighbors offering cookies. Even people who had once defended Burgett were here, their faces softer, relieved. "It feels different," I said. "Like the air itself is lighter." Jason nodded. "We've got scars, though. People lost money, some lost trust. But maybe now, without her, we can start over." As twilight deepened, conversations turned reflective. Neighbors swapped stories of the petty humiliations they had endured: a $100 fine for a garden gnome, threats over porch swings, citations for flags and flower pots. Each story carried frustration, but also release. Telling them aloud in this space felt like pulling weeds from a garden, painful but necessary. At one point, a man who had rarely spoken at meetings stood and cleared his throat. "We all let it happen," he said quietly, "not because we wanted to, but because it was easier. She thrived on our silence. That's not going to happen again." Applause followed, not raucous, but steady, the kind of agreement that runs deeper than words. Later, as the stars began to prick the sky, I found myself staring at the calm surface of the lake. The same water that had once been a battlefield now reflected nothing but moonlight. My nephew tossed stones again, counting skips, his laughter carrying across the stillness. I thought of the first time Burgett had marched down that trail, clipboard in hand, eyes narrowed, declaring my friends trespassers on land that wasn't hers. It felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been only months. Back then, I hadn't realized her obsession with control was just the surface of something darker: forged maps, fake invoices, stolen money. And yet, as much damage as she caused, her downfall had forced us to see something we'd ignored for too long: that power only works when people surrender to it. Jason wandered back over, his voice low. "Do you ever wonder how many other neighborhoods are living under someone like her?" I considered that. "Probably more than we'd like to admit. HOAs can be good in theory, but all it takes is one person hungry for control to turn them into a kingdom." He gave a humorless laugh. "A kingdom built on fear." I nodded, then glanced back at the water. But fear only lasts until people stop being afraid. As the night wound down, Folding chairs were packed up, plates stacked, children gathered by tired parents. One by one. Neighbors drifted home, leaving the lakefront quiet again. I lingered a while longer, staring at the brass plaque gleaming faintly in the moonlight. The land was mine, yes. But more than that, the neighborhood was ours again, reclaimed not by paperwork, but by people deciding they'd had enough. On the walk back up the path, I thought of the question that would linger long after Birgit was gone. A question every neighbor here would have to ask themselves. If someone tried to rule your street like a kingdom, would you have the courage to stand up?